I am a retired faculty member, retired sociologist from CSU East Bay, and I was department chair for some years, and I spent 2 years as dean of my college. And when I retired, I said, I'm going to spend some time to figure out what the hell has been going on here, that I could not find out what was happening when I was a chair and even a dean. So I spent 2 years just researching, following the money, following enrollments, campus by campus, and found myself deeply involved in not just the CSU, but in order to understand the CSU, I also had to go into the UC and the community colleges. And the result of this is a book which has recently been published, and you can pass that around when you finish. And it turns out, to my shock and dismay, it is the first book that I know of who has been published by a CSU faculty member about the CSU. When you look at the literature on the CSU, you can stack it on one chair, which I did, and it's either written by institutions at UC or by the CSU Chancellor's Office. So in 50 some odd years of the existence of the CSU, nobody knows what the hell faculty do or that they even existed. It's kind of like, if if it's not in print, or now if it's not in video form of some sort, it never existed. You never existed. So I was quite shocked to find that out. So anyway, what I want to do is go through a couple of highlights of what I found relevant to union organizing. I think that's the way I should do this. So I'm going to go through some slides very quickly. They are my notes or my comments, and I'm also going to entertain you on some of this stuff because it's quite amazing. First of all, the neoliberal university is not just part of some specific specialized literature. It is part of a larger literature on the crisis in higher education. In this crisis of higher education literature, there are a series of books that have been published by major publishers, not university books, major publishers who, for $25, you can pick up their books in airport bookstores and Barnes and Nobles and so forth and so on. And these people go on lecture tours, like Condoleezza Rice and so forth, making big money speaking and so on. And there's a group of them, about 15 people. And interestingly, the people who've written on the crisis of higher education, none of them are public university graduates. None of them, not a single one of them. And what they write about are the unqualified students, rising costs, poor teaching, declining standards, jobless graduates, kids who graduate from college and come home simply jobless and wayless and don't know what to do with themselves, and employer complaints about people coming into who they're hiring, who recent graduates who have no skills and just seem to be totally worthless. And so, of course, the problem was with the university. And the explanation that they offer in this literature is that university organizations are passé. Just, they're not run like businesses, they're inefficient, ineffective, that the in-person teaching is obsolete. Just obsolete. How can you do something that was started in the 12th century and you're still doing the same damn thing? Okay? Computers and toys essentially can do a much better job than the people. Furthermore, faculty in universities run around talking about their education and their mission and so forth, but they have no evaluation of student learning, and they can't tell you what people take away with them as when they get their degrees. And in fact, one of the things that they enjoy more than anything else is interviewing students who have graduated from college and ask you, well, what did you get? And my God, what you hear is, well, I don't know what the hell I got. I took 60 units and I got my degree and that's that, okay? Many times the students are the least articulate people on what they got from their experience. And then furthermore, they point out that in most states, higher education funding is a discretionary budget item and is one of the only discretionary budget items. So we know about the privatization of medicine, right? This huge disaster which is in place and which has happened. You don't have state and city hospitals anymore. They've all been folded into somebody's private this and private that. And what we don't realize is that higher education money in most states is the next big pot of money sitting there that is a target for acquisition by Goldman Sachs and so forth and so on. I mean, this is the next big pot of money, okay? So the fact that they're coming after us is, we shouldn't be surprised because, this is huge state money. Furthermore, when you mention English department, social sciences, and so forth, you're talking about those liberal people who have taken over the university and they're not providing a balanced education, so the hell with them, okay? Now, I could go through the critiques of this stuff. I don't need to do that because, you folks are into it. But one of the most interesting things that I want to point out here, because of our affiliations, is that the CSU is the super colonized institution in the state of California. It's super colonized because when you talk about higher education in the state of California, it is invariably about the UC. You don't hear anything about the CSU, okay? Christopher Newfield is coming here this afternoon. I can't be here this afternoon. I'd like to be here to ask him the following question. How could he write a book? How could he write a book about unmasking the public university and his references to public university are virtually all UC. He has a half a page on the CSU. Somebody please ask him. How the hell did he write a whole book and he's got half a page on the CSU? Seriously. Oh, just an afterthought. Oh, CSU. 23 campuses, 440,000 students, 22,000 faculty members. Oh, footnote. Ask him that. 70% of all college students are enrolled in public universities in the United States. It's higher in the state of California. 95% of all public universities are, interestingly, non-selective and non-elite. Interesting, okay? Anytime there's a scandal or, I like to use the analogy, someone in the UC pees on a fire hydrant, the CSU gets a budget cut. And I'm going to show you why that's the case. Why does the CSU get a budget cut every time something happens in the UC? Well, the people who run, I don't want to go through, I'll have to go back to that. The people who run the CSU are the state legislature. 80% of our budget comes from the state legislature. But for the UC, selectively less and less of the instructional piece of the UC budget comes from the legislator, okay? So basically, when something happens in the UC, you mentioned the scandals and so forth, the president of UC can say, oh, well, we're some mea culpa, well, we won't do that again. And of course they're gonna do it again, okay? And the legislators are pissed off about that, and they push back at the UC faculty, at the UC administrators. And the UC faculty tell the UC administrators, well, damn it, if you fuck with us, we will walk. We will go to Harvard or Yale or wherever the hell, they want to go to. So nothing happens. So what do you do when you're a legislator and you're pissed off with higher education? you forget that there's a distinction between the UC and the CSU. So, CSU, bam, there you go. We're going to cut you guys over there. And we're going to cut you despite the fact that you teach twice as much. Your pay is half of what it is in the UC. You're doing exactly what they want you to do in terms of state efficiency and effectiveness and so forth. Our graduates do not have a problem getting jobs because in most cases they already have jobs before they graduate. Okay? So all of the crisis of education bullshit does not apply to the CSU, but you never know that because the state of California does not publicize anything about the CSU, its largest system. Okay? So, okay, I got that off my chest. Where is it here? No, let me get back up here. Yeah, so before I get into the master plan, I want to go back to this piece. So because the CSU is invisible, they can mess with your budget. They can cut your budget much more readily, keep it cut, and so on. Now, so I assume my hypothesis when I started this is that the UC was favored by the state legislature over the CSU in terms of budgets, okay? Want to know something? I was wrong. It turns out that when the state cuts higher education budgets, they cut the UC, CSU pretty much in the same amounts, all right? So I was wrong in that hypothesis. But I found out something else quite on the side that I think should be of interest to you. The state of California has two different higher education budgets. They have a budget for facilities, maintenance, repairs, rebuild, in other words, the facilities budget that you use to build campuses, maintain campuses, and so forth. And then you have the instructional budget. What is interesting about these budget cuts is that the budget cuts happen on the instructional side, but not on the buildings, maintenance, facilities side. And that budget is almost as large as the instructional piece. It doesn't get cut. When you read the notes of the trustee meetings and of the state legislative subcommittee in higher education, 90% of their discussion is about facilities. It's a discussion on the facility side of the budget and almost no discussion on the instructional side. And in fact, if I were a legislator and I didn't know anything about higher education and I sat on those committees, I wouldn't know anything about the instructional piece because it's not discussed. It's not a piece of interest. So when they cut and talk about we don't have money, they're saying we don't have money for instruction, but they have money to maintain these marvelous facilities and so forth. So this is one of the consequences of being an invisible university in terms of the CSU. Now, something else is interesting about this is that when we talk about union fights on local levels and contracts on the campus level and so forth, we're really talking about food fights that have only local impact. The fact of the matter is our local administrations that we are having battles with are basically hirelings from the state to manage what comes down from top. I have a slide here which I won't try to find. All of the decision making goes from the top, the governor, the legislative subcommittee in higher education, comes down then to the three system chancellor's offices, to the trustees, and then at the very bottom are the campus administrations. The campus administrations can only respond to what they get from their upper level. So if we want to focus on where the real power is and reform this whole system, we really we need to not only be in Sacramento, but we need to be in the governor's office and in the state legislative higher education committee members. We should be at their, know where they live and camp on their doorsteps. Otherwise, you're dealing with people who have been paid $450,000 or $200 and something thousand to just simply mess with you, play with you, and do battle with you. And whether you win or lose, the fact of the matter is, it's going to come from on high. And those people, whether it's a liberal university, neoliberal university, whatever it is, they're taking orders from upstairs. So, we need to be really more efficient in who we go after. Because in fact of the matter is, I've never heard the following chant: get rid of local administrations. What do you need them for? President, the provost, the provost is needed to kind of distribute the money locally, but the president and a bunch of vice presidents and people who are responding to the state are absolutely worthless, useless. What do? They're not doing any, if they're given orders from upstairs, then we should report to the people who are giving the orders and not have to go through this other layer of administration. So that's my view on that piece. The price of obscurity, of course, is we get budget cuts, problems at elite universities get solved in non-elite institutions. Decision makers do not know the difference between the UC and the CSU. Chris, you know this well. When we have speakers come to our campuses, many times they start off, well, thank you for inviting me to the UC East Bay. Hey, dude, we are different systems. Hello, okay? So, and they never say, going to the UC and say, thank you for inviting me to the California State University at Berkeley. They say, thank you for inviting me to UC East Bay, UC San Jose, and so forth. So they don't know. They really do not know that there are different systems with different missions. And you can't blame them because they have no information out there that explains to them that. They don't know that there's a master plan. Nobody knows. I mean, if you got to be gray hair like us to know that there was a master plan once, and that this was the blueprint for the administration of higher education in the state. So I won't go into the master details of it. It's basically dead because they're not following it anymore, and they've even said so on their own. Now, this slide I want you to look at. This is something that really almost makes it worth getting the book, having your library get the book. It shows what the proportion of higher education money, what the proportion of dollars spent by from the California General Fund each year is for higher education. And you'll notice in 1967, 68, we spend 16.8% of the general funds for higher education. Those were the good old days, okay? There was enough money to run the UC, CSU, and community college systems, and for faculty salaries and low tuition. Now let's jump to the bottom. It's now down to 12.7 as of 2002 and 3. If we update this to 2015, it's down to 11.2 and dropping. Okay? So the food fights that we're having and the pressure on the on faculty and departments to take money from everywhere is largely for the fact that the state has been cutting back. Now, where is this money going? It's not like the state doesn't have the money. The money is there. It's just now, it's not important anymore. It's not to be spent on higher education. Who are the administrations who did the cuts? We have an interesting pattern here. Republicans cut, Democrats maintain the cuts. Okay? So you got this plateau effect. You got money, Republicans cut you, you come down, you get a Democratic administration, they plateau it. The next Republican administration comes on, you get cut again, you come down, the Democrats maintain. And so what it basically, it's a downward spiral, but it's stair-stepped downward. And I think it's interesting that Democrats are just as much complicit in this as the Republicans. And they all talk about, we don't have the money, but we know that's not the case. The state has got the money, okay? They just don't want to spend it on higher ed, and this is the way they operate. Of course, Brown is continuing this. The Terminator really did us in. You look at the highest cuts, he brought us from 14% down to 11%, was under Schwarzenegger. So he really, really did us in. Who's responsible for the cuts? This is what I was talking about earlier. The decision making is all down, which means the protest should be all up. Local food fights, I mean, basically I say to the president of my campus, you really are one of us, you have to go into the smelly budget bathroom and try to work it out. And you know that this is bullshit, and he basically has to, but, that's the fact of the matter. So the Higher Education Committee, this book which I passed around to you, I have tried to get into the hands of the Higher Education Committee members. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to see it. One of them actually tried to read it. I wanted him to do a preface on it because he was a friend of higher education. And I can't hear from him, okay? So that tells me I did a good job.
Who was that?
Fong. Direct effect of budget cuts, you know what the direct effects are. I don't need to get into that. Privatization. Privatization, people, has been talked about for 2 decades. Every major higher education reform institution in the state, in the country, has been talking privatization. There's a literature on privatization, people. There's a whole literature on it. It's been out there. They've been talking about it, and they say California's got to come first, and then the domino effect, all the rest will fall into place. So I characterize that. Now, why is this, this is my last point, why the budget cuts? Why the evil of these cuts and cuts and cuts and willingness to eventually eliminate public higher education? The reason for this is the following. The main reason, there are a number of reasons, not just neoliberal philosophy. They are doing this because they perceive that the students in the system are not their students. I have a whole section on other people's children. The legislators and the governor do not want to spend the kind of money they've been spending on the UC and CSU on instruction for other people's children. Blacks, Latinos, okay, immigrants, white kids who look strange, other people's children. They don't want to do that, all right? And the higher the minority enrollment, the more pressure there is in their own minds to cut back, and the more they are willing to abandon the mission of public higher education. Okay? That's what it's about. The young people who are now freshmen in the UC and the CSU are the first generation of young people who were getting budget cuts in the first grade. If you go back and look at the budgets of K through 12, when they hit first grade, you saw this huge decline in funding for K through 12 for those young people. And this budget cut business has followed them all the way through elementary school, all the way up. And it's interesting, the cuts have been, as they go up, the cuts are getting increase. And now they've hit public higher education, and what are we saying? Oh, budget cuts. We could have saw it coming. So these same cuts are now in public higher education because it's other people's children. Final point, how do we turn this around? We need to get the general public on our side. Everything that's being said in this conference, the general public should know everything here. The biggest sin of the CSU and the UC administration is they have this smiley face and they tell nothing. The public has no idea of what is going on. They should know, they should be challenged. We should have a proposition that makes higher education a non-discretionary budget item, and it should be 16%. We should be saying 16%. Why? Because that is the future of the state. 16% of the state budget should go to higher education. Okay? So, there it is.